bar nous attend à 7 heures et on est déjà en retard. Bah, je veux dire seulement ce qui est déjà, ce qui est bien évident. Toutes les photos que vous voyez, c'était sur le Kodachrome, le dia, qui n'existe plus. Et je devais porter tout mon film sur la moto pour des années. Enfin, je ne me permettais pas de prendre plus qu'un coup sur chaque sujet. Et je ne le voyais pas pour 3 ans. Ça veut dire je n'ai pas pu apprendre à faire la photographie parce que je n'avais pas de possibilité. J'ai perdu plusieurs qui m'ont fait beaucoup de mal. Et aussi, je veux seulement ajouter que, de mon avis, les gens qui voyagent maintenant prennent beaucoup trop de photos. Et aussi que pour une personne voyageant, il est naturellement impossible de faire des photos de ce qui se passe. Enfin, dans l'histoire que j'ai écrite, il y a très peu de possibilités de trouver des photos qui illustrent ce que je dis, parce que j'étais en train de le faire. Et pour cette raison, vous allez voir des photos pendant beaucoup de temps, tant que je parle. Et je regrette que c'est en anglais, et vous devez vous patienter. Je ne peux rien faire avec. On voulait faire un commentaire en français, mais c'était vraiment trop difficile, trop tard pour le faire. Un de ces jours, peut-être, on le ferait, avec de l'aide des volontiers qui se trouvent peut-être ici. Et voilà, c'est ça. C'est l'histoire du commencement du voyage jusqu'au bout d'Afrique. On y va.
I thought about traveling by boat or by plane or in cars or on horseback or with a donkey. And then quite suddenly I thought, why not go around the world on a motorcycle? The idea was shocking at first. It sounded very dangerous. But it was also immensely appealing, and I saw immediately that it would be the ideal vehicle. It would let me explore the world in exactly the way I wanted to. Cheap, down-to-earth, vulnerable, easy to ship and maintain, and above all, exciting. I was sure it had better been done. I would be the first. I was a writer, and it would make a great book. I had no doubt I could sell the idea and raise enough money. By the end of that day, it was in March of 1973, I knew I would do it or die in the attempt. I was convinced that this would be an extraordinary adventure and worth any risk. After a few months, I persuaded the Sunday Times to give me some cash up front in exchange for occasional articles. And a publisher I knew added a bit more, and with that I thought I had enough. How long would I be away? Well, we guessed maybe 18 months. In fact, it took 4 years. Aren't you a bit old for this sort of thing, said the press. Well, it was a reasonable question. I was 42, and of course the idea didn't come out of nowhere. Travel was in my blood. My parents used to have a little house on the edge of London, but I was born in Germany and my mother brought me back at the age of 3 months. When I was 5 years old, in early 1937, their marriage exploded, and while they went through the sordid business of divorce, as it used to be in those days, I was sent back to my grandmother in Germany. I travelled alone on a luxury liner, and I can only remember having a wonderful time on the boat. I learned to speak German fluently and was very keen to join the Hitler Youth, who had glamorous leather belts and a knife. It was ironic, really, because 2 years later they would have sent me to the gas chamber, since my father was Jewish. Then came the war. They bombed us. We bombed my grandmother. The war ended, but I was 17 before I could get away again. I rode a bicycle through France to the Mediterranean to make sure it was blue. France was stripped bare by the war. It was a demanding and fascinating journey, and I suppose it planted the seed that grew into Jupiter's travels. I also fell in love with France, and it's where I ended up, restoring this wonderful old ruined building in the south, when I conceived this journey. Eventually, I made a career in newspapers and magazines. I went all over Europe, I visited Mexico and the States, but the rest of the world was still a tantalizing mystery. Vast areas, Africa, India, Australia, South America, they were all just blank spaces in my consciousness. Now suddenly here was a way to fill in the blanks. I was tremendously excited, and that excitement carried me through 6 months to the point of departure. My plan did have one minor drawback. I knew nothing about bikes. I didn't have one, I didn't ride one. But then millions of people did, so how hard could it be? I was sure I could handle it, but first I needed a bike. Should it be British, German, Japanese? Unlike today, there were only two kinds of motorcycle. There were road bikes or there were race bikes. A friend advised me to go to Triumph. He said they made the most reliable British bike and the lightest. It was a sentimental choice too. They were in dire trouble and they needed the publicity. With the newspaper behind me, they were eager to help. I spent a day in the old Triumph factory at Meriden. They put me up at a pub down the road. It was the time of the war in Vietnam, and they were playing, I remember, "Tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree," and they were playing it again and again and again. I met with the legendary Triumph designer, Doug Heel, though of course I'd never heard of him, and they wanted me to ride a Tiger, a 500cc vertical twin. They had a long list of modifications, and we talked about them. And all the time, I was thinking, they don't even know I haven't got a license. But then none of the modifications were made either, so I suppose we were all bluffing. I failed my first test on a Honda Cub for sticking my knees out too far, but I did get a license in the end, and just in time. My bike, when I got it, was almost the last one out of the factory before they locked the doors. It was so hastily prepared that a pint of oil fell out of the chain case on my way down to London. But it was easily fixed, and I was very pleased with the bike. I took the bike to France, where I was living at the time, and on a plateau near my home I practiced riding and packing. I worked on a mosquito-proof extension to my tent and imagined myself writing under it in the jungle. My girlfriend Jo took the pictures. Later I came off on a gravel road and a friendly doctor spent an hour pulling little stones out of my thigh. So Jo also made me a pair of beautiful lambskin chaps. And on top of that, she gave me the flying jacket her father had used in World War II. She really loved me. It became very hard to leave her behind. There weren't many accessories for bikes in those days. A fine old gentleman called Ken Craven made those fiberglass panniers, and I found a plastic tank bag, but aside from that, I had to improvise from army surplus stores. I tied a 5-gallon plastic jerry on the back to give me more range. I slung 2 canvas bags across the tank, and I stuffed a rucksack between me and the jerry can, and that was it. I never had a windscreen or a fairing. I wanted to be visible. I had simple boots, gloves, and an open-faced helmet. I wanted to wear ordinary clothes so the natives could see I was human. Not that there was much choice. To go dressed in racing leathers would have been ridiculous. The one big question that dominated all my thinking was which way to go. The Soviet Union was inaccessible, so I had to stay south of the Himalayas. It meant going either east towards India or south down Africa. Before I could decide, I needed a lot of information, and it's hard to imagine today what life was like before the internet. No computers, no Google, no email, no mobile anything, and of course no Lonely Planet guides either. If you wanted information, you had to find a person or a book. I read books, I talked to people, and I bought maps. I still have the 3 maps that Michelin made to cover Africa. Here they are. When I spread them out on the dining room floor, I almost had a panic attack. Africa looked enormous. I thought it would be a huge physical challenge and really scary to boot. And because of that, because I didn't want the prospect looming over me, I decided to go through Africa first. The obvious way to cross to Africa was from Sicily to Tunisia. I was keen to see Ethiopia. I had some friends there too, and that meant going through Libya, Egypt and Sudan. All those countries demanded expensive visas, and all of them were slow and difficult to get. So I had to have 2 passports to be able to get them in time, as well as all kinds of documents and vaccinations. It seemed to me that once I got past Ethiopia to Kenya, it might be easier. Then from Cape Town, I could get a ship to South America. We actually booked a passage for the following May, not knowing that by the time I got there, the shipping line would no longer exist. Here's the route I planned, and for the most part I stuck to it. From Africa across to Brazil, then Argentina, Chile, and so on up to California, then to Australia somehow, and then Singapore, and back overland to Europe. About 60,000 miles on land. It's easy to rattle off these names now, but then it was pure magic. I had no idea what they meant. I have to admit, at times I was really scared of what I'd let myself in for. I remember that a nervous rash broke out over my neck and shoulders, but nothing could stop me. By September, it became urgent to get away. I knew I had to get to Ethiopia before the rainy season. We decided on October the 6th for me to leave officially. It was a Saturday, so the news could be in the paper next morning. The Sunday before, the paper had published a picture across 2 pages. It showed everything I was taking with me. You can see it was still the swinging 60s, really, with my Beatles haircut and my Ringo moustache and flower power shirt, also made by Joe, incidentally. But some things haven't changed. The 3 most pressing problems in 1973 were population growth, pollution, and international terrorism. Back then we thought we could deal with them, but today I'm not so sure, and now climate change threatens to outdo them all. On Saturday, October the 6th, I was parked outside the newspaper office. I was still adding little things at the last minute, a space blanket, a snake bite kit, another map. The bike was ridiculously overloaded. They gave me a big pack of Kodachrome film, but there was nowhere to put it. Then they showed me the story in next day's paper. Well, now I really had to go. And then they gave me the astonishing news that Egypt had just launched a massive tank assault against Israel. I was headed straight for a war, and because of the visas, there was nothing I could do about it. For a moment, I was in black despair. But then somehow I shrugged it off. I got on the bike. My spirits lifted. I thought, what the hell, I'm going around the world. And as I rode off into the night, I actually started singing. There were many goodbyes, as you can imagine, but I staged my last ceremonial farewell on the promenade at Nice at the great Westminster